Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode we're going to be working on the truck again here, and we're going to be solving an issue that has been driving me crazy for the better part of 2 years, and that is a squeaky leaf spring. So, stick with me, I'm going to show you guys how I fix this. All right, so for those of you that are a little less familiar with truck suspensions, when compared to a Classic Mini or really any other modern vehicle, most trucks are designed to carry a heavy load. And one of the best ways to carry those heavy loads is with something called a leaf spring. A leaf spring is pretty much what it sounds like. It is essentially a leaf-shaped piece of metal or multiple stacked pieces of metal which create a spring force on the wheel. So you have a point mounted in the front and a point mounted in the rear, and that spring will compress down, or I should say, I guess it's kind of like this when you don't have a load in it, and then as you add a load it starts to expand and kind of press up into the suspension. Now they work fine, but they are an older style of suspension system, and they're not used on most modern vehicles except for trucks and other things that carry a load. Now, one of the most annoying things about a leaf spring suspension is that it has 2 or 3 pivot points in the front and the back, and so you have essentially 3 points where you can get a lot of squeaking. There is also contact points between each leaf, which can cause some squeaking or chirping every once in a while. Now, I have isolated the squeaking in my truck to where the leaf spring is connecting to the chassis mount on the front sides of my truck. The rear actually doesn't squeak, and so it's never really been an issue. I just spray it a little bit with some dry lube and it's fine. But no matter how much lubrication I add to this thing, no matter how much I try and quiet down that poly bushing up there, it just isn't having it. So that's where this new part comes in that I am hoping is going to solve all of my issues. So the part I'm talking about is something called a greasable pin. For those of you who have a Mini or Mini vehicles, there are grease points all over modern vehicles. This one, however, doesn't have any grease points. So whatever grease you add when you put these bushings in is the grease that is there forever. And if you want to add more, in theory, you would need to take it apart. Well, a really great company here in the US called Dobinsons creates greasable pins that can replace some of the factory hardware that is on the Tacoma. Their website is a little confusing. I bought these with my own money. This isn't like a sponsored video or anything. Their website can be a little bit confusing in terms of which pin goes for which vehicle, but I put a link down in my description for this pin with the model number that should be popping up on the screen right now. That is the pin for the 3rd gen Tacomas. Now there is some fitment details that you need to read through in the notes. Even there, it's a little confusing, but essentially these are made for the front chassis mounts, and in some situations, depending on your truck and generation, you can use them in the rear as well for one of the pivot points. Don't know which one. I haven't tried this before. This is all kind of new territory for me. But for today's video, I'm only going to be replacing the front chassis mount bolts because they are the ones that are the squeakiest. Now I'm going to show you guys what I mean when I say squeaky. It's not just like a light squeak. It is enough to drive you into insanity. But the lift kit I have on my truck is an Old Man Emu. That's an ARB Systems suspension upgrade. Essentially, I believe, if I recall correctly, it's a 3-inch lift on the back. I don't remember what it is on the front, but it replaces all of the leaf springs. So this is the Old Man Emu leaf pack. While I'm down here, I am going to go ahead and replace the poly bushings that are there that went on with the leaf pack with a brand new set. Now, it's pretty straightforward how this works, but I'm going to show you guys anyway. Essentially, these 2 poly bushings get pressed into each side of the leaf pack. There is a sleeve that goes through the center of them. That would slide through and create a structured system for the bolt to pass through. Now inside, there's a whole bunch of texture, presumably to keep this from sticking and moving. we're going to be adding grease inside this. We're going to be adding grease to the outside of this, the inside and outside of this pin. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the Dobinsons Greasable pin. So you can see here, let's get that to focus, there is a hole in this pin and a grease nipple on the end. Now the way that this will work with these poly bushings is this will slide through the sleeve, just like that, and bolt in just like normal. But the benefit here is that you can put a grease gun on this nipple here and pump grease into first this sleeve right here, but then after that sleeve, it's going to press out the edges of this bolt. And with this setup here, let's just go ahead and slide the sleeve in here. You can see what'll end up happening is grease will come out of that inner sleeve, and then it will squeeze out onto the sides of this poly bushing. Now this is really cool because essentially what happens with these is you go off-roading, you get some dirt in them, dirt gets down in between, and then that's what's causing that squeaking. It's like, yep, constant squeaking when you take this off-road, which is kind of why you would lift a truck like this. You want to take it off-road, you want to take it on some dirt roads, you want to take it through some mud. All of those things add noise. And so the cool thing is when you grease this, not only are you adding lubrication into this, but you're also, by nature of squeezing the grease and it coming out from the inside, you're pressing all of that dirt and gunk out of these bushings. So in theory, they should last longer. All of this is to remain to be seen. So what I want to do today is jack up the rear of my truck. I'm hoping that bolt and everything is totally accessible without taking the wheel off. So I'm hoping that I can lift the vehicle up and then add my other jack and unbolt that and then slowly lower that leaf spring so that I can get this new poly bushing in, new sleeve, and everything is all updated and nice. Now, one thing that you can consider doing when you are putting in this new poly bushing, they do come as a kit, and each kit is for one side of your vehicle. If I wanted to, I'm only going to test it on the front today, but if I wanted to, I could disconnect the rear of the leaf pack, replace it with another one of these greasable pins, and put new bushings on that side, but I have fully isolated the squeak to this side of my leaf pack. So, with all of that out of the way, I'm going to show you guys what I mean when I say squeak. I'm going to go ahead and put the mic over there somewhere, and I'm going to jump on the car. I'll show you what I mean. So, as you guys can see, it's really, really fucking annoying. So, let's start taking it apart. I'm going to get the camera underneath there and show you guys exactly what we're going to be disconnecting. I'm going to go ahead and just rock through it and show you guys it's basically just one bolt. The key with this is that you guys do put that bolt back in and fully torque it down to factory specification. All right, so to start things off, you simply have to break the bolt loose that's on this chassis mount. Now, this process can be a little bit tedious. It can take a little bit. You can see me kind of lifting the car up, setting it back down, lifting it up, and then ultimately getting this bolt out using my electric ratchet. Now, once you have that disconnected, you'll also want to disconnect that line up there, and then we'll move on to removing the bushing. Now, depending on how long this bushing's been in here, this might be easier or harder for you. Essentially, you punch out that center metal piece, and then you gotta kind of just pry this poly bushing out. Now, it should come out relatively easy, and you'll see the ones that came out of my truck here are in kind of rough shape. Some of them have a little bit of scoring and pitting, and I think that's where most of the noise was coming from, that kind of mixture in grease and dirt. But once you do that, it's simply time to clean up the mounting surface, grease it back up with a suitable grease for your poly bushings, and then put those greased up poly bushings back into place. So one on one side, then the other on the other side, and then press in your metal sleeve, and that's it for installing the bushing. After that is definitely the hardest part of this whole installation, and that is getting this hole lined back up with the chassis mount. So it was a process of lifting, shifting, lifting the leaf spring, lifting the chassis of the truck, back and forth until we got this line lined up. It took a long time, But once that was lined up, we were able to put our new greasable pin directly in place. Now you'll notice I start screwing it in a little bit. Then I take my socket off of my wrench and I hammer the socket instead of hammering the grease nipple because we don't want to mess that up. Do this again, get it all in place here. And once that kind of passes through the sleeve and the chassis mount, you're able to take your regular nut and finger install it on the back and then torque this up to spec. And that spec is 89 foot-pounds of torque. After that, we get to move on to the fun part, which is greasing this new pin. Now you'll see me pumping the grease into this pin, and if you look at the bottom there, you can kind of see that grease start to pump out the bottom edge. Wipe that excess off, and then you're ready to go. Okay, so now that I am like 2 seconds away from having a heat stroke, we are finished with the single pin that we did here in our driveway. Now this whole job would be made much easier with a whole lift and multiple, crank jacks and all of those different things, but it is possible to do on your driveway. The biggest thing is that you need some pry bars, you need the 19mm socket, the 20mm socket for the new grease pin that goes through. You will need to disconnect your shock as well. I don't think I showed that on the video. Unfortunately, you guys probably can tell it sounds a little bit different, and that's because my camera fell over and I broke my microphone setup. So we're switched to the iPhone right now for this filming segment. But everything is done, and I'm really excited with how it turned out. You guys saw it's greasable, fully accessible, and it has those new bushings in there. We blasted them with a brand new heavy-duty grease. It's really important because these are poly bushings that you get the correct grease for those bushings. The main thing is if you can get grease from the manufacturer, try and get that. Unfortunately, these kits from Old Man Emu don't come with the grease for whatever reason, but the grease that I used on this setup is popping up in the corner here, and I also superimposed it while I was putting it on. If you want to pick that up, I have links to the pin, the bushings, and the grease all in my description below. Now, the last thing I want to do is a quick sound test. So I'm gonna move my iPhone right up underneath here. I'm gonna hop up and I'm gonna give the truck a little shake, and then we're gonna see, did it actually make a difference? All right, sound test time. So it does sound like we do still have some sound down there, but I don't think it's from this anymore. I suspect that the sound here was so loud that we couldn't hear the other bushings in the back of the leaf spring. So next job, we'll be swapping out the pins on the back as well, but I'm not gonna carry you guys along with me on that one. It's pretty much gonna be the exact same process here with some slight variation because it's the double shackle bolt back there. All right, so that's going to wrap up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a small little deviation away from most of my stuff, or rather most of the mini-related things, but I figured I might take some time and give some TLC to my truck. So, if you have any questions whatsoever about what I did in this video, feel free to post those in the comments section below. But until I see you on the next episode, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis and Tacomas, and motor on. See you guys.